Polls will stay open until 7 o'clock tonight. Already we've been hearing about issues and delays at some polling locations across North Texas. Chris, what are you seeing out there?
Well, we are already seeing the confusion this morning, including here at Fretz Park. We were talking to some voters as they were leaving here in the parking lot. Many told us they showed up here because it's where they always vote, only to be told they had to go to another location. I spoke with the election judge here. He told me there's been plenty of confusion because of this new change and that it was not in effect for early voting. It's in effect only today on Election Day. Now, complicating things further, two voters can live in the same precinct yet have different voting locations depending if they're voting in the Democrat or Republican primary. So easy to understand why voters are confused and frustrated.
Yesterday was primary day in Texas. And if you tried to vote in Dallas County, there's a real chance the polling place you've used for years, the one close to work, the one on the way home, wasn't your polling place anymore. Nobody told you. You just showed up and got turned away. For 15 years, Texas counties ran joint elections, vote anywhere centers. You didn't have to find your specific precinct. You just found the polling place and voted. It worked. Millions of Texans used it without a second thought. This year, the GOP chairs in Dallas and Williamson counties decided to end it. No announcement big enough to reach everyone. No grace period, just gone. And y'all, what happened next was entirely predictable, which is kind of the point.
On Tuesday in Dallas County, voting will look different.
On Election Day, the precincts will be split, and you'll have to go to your assigned precinct. The vote centers won't be available to voters on Election Day.
It'll be unlike early voting, no vote centers, and only one place you can cast your ballot.
And so it's been about 15 years since anything like this has happened.
Jessica Husman, the editorial director of VoteBee, says your designated precinct may be different than you think.
And the polling locations are sometimes combined, but often they are separated. Well, I think we're going to see a lot of instances of people going to the same polling location that they have always gone to and then being told that they can't vote there. And that's going to cause a lot of anxiety for people at the polling location, especially given the culture around voting right now.
The system didn't break on its own. Party chairs made a deliberate policy choice, one that effectively penalized the 9-to-5 worker and turned your vote into an afterthought. Here's how this actually worked, because the mechanics matter. Under Texas Election Code, if both parties agree, a county can run what's called a countywide polling place program, vote anywhere centers, where any registered voter in the county can cast a ballot at any location. Dallas County has used this system since the mid-2000s. It's efficient, it reduces confusion, it's specifically designed for working people who can't always make it to a specific address during a specific window. For that system to work, both parties have to sign a joint election agreement. Both. If one party refuses, the county is legally required to revert to precinct-specific voting, meaning every voter must find and travel to their assigned precinct and only their precinct, or their ballot doesn't count. This year, Dallas County GOP Chair Allen West refused to sign. Williamson County GOP did the same. That's it. That's the whole mechanism. One signature withheld, and 15 years of functional voting infrastructure collapsed overnight. The result? On early voting days, voters had access to 74 countywide vote centers. Go anywhere, vote. Done. On Election Day itself, those same voters were suddenly required to find one of 400 plus precinct-specific locations. That's a 540% increase in the number of distinct sites a voter had to correctly identify. Not 540% more locations, 540% more locations that each only serve a specific slice of voters who need to know in advance exactly which one is theirs. And here's the thing about that number. It doesn't just mean more options. It means more chances to show up at the wrong place, more chances to be turned away, more chances to leave and not come back because you've already used your lunch break and your boss isn't going to give you another one. The Texas Tribune verified this timeline going back to January 9th, 2026. This wasn't a last-minute logistical surprise. The GOP chairs knew months in advance what they were doing. They chose this. And Dallas County voters, many of whom had voted at the same location for over a decade, showed up to a door that told them, "Not here, try again." That's not a broken system. That's the system working exactly as designed. A deliberate choice with entirely predictable consequences, made by people who knew exactly what they were doing, which is pretty wild when you think about it. Now here's where it gets, and I want to pick my words carefully here, genuinely stunning. Because just when a local judge stepped in to give confused voters a little more time, the state's top law enforcement official filed an emergency motion to stop her. That official was also on the ballot that day. I'm not editorializing. That is just what happened. Keep that in your head. By 5:30 p.m. yesterday, Election Day, March 3rd, the chaos was no longer theoretical. Dallas County's election website had crashed. Not slowed down, crashed. Voters across the county were trying to look up their new precinct assignments in real time, flooding the site with traffic it couldn't handle. People were showing up at the wrong doors, leaving without voting, calling the county and getting busy signals. Dallas County District Judge Stacey Williams issued an emergency order at 5:30 p.m., citing, and this is her language, mass confusion. She extended polling hours until 9 p.m. Dallas County Judge Clay Jenkins confirmed publicly that the crash was caused by the surge in voters trying to navigate a system they'd never had to navigate before. This wasn't normal Election Day traffic. It was the direct, predictable consequence of dismantling vote-anywhere infrastructure and giving people no meaningful notice that their polling place had changed. Representative Jasmine Crockett, whose district covers parts of Dallas, said in a statement yesterday, "This effort to suppress the vote, to confuse and inconvenience voters, is having its intended effect as people are being turned away from the polls." And then, after 7 p.m., Ken Paxton, acting in his capacity as Attorney General of Texas, filed an emergency stay with the Texas Supreme Court. He asked the court to block Judge Williams' extension and to order that any ballot cast after 7 p.m. be, in the court's own words, segregated. The Texas Supreme Court granted it. So let's be precise about what that word means. And I want to be clear, segregated is the Texas Supreme Court's own language, not ours. Any voter who arrived at their correct precinct after 7 p.m. because they spent the evening at the wrong precinct, because the website was down, because the Vote Anywhere system had been dismantled months earlier, that voter's ballot was set aside, not counted in the initial totals, separated, segregated. Those are the court's words. And Paxton, who filed that motion in his role as AG, was himself a candidate in the U.S. Senate GOP primary on that same ballot, running against John Cornyn. The precincts most affected by the chaos, the urban precincts where his numbers were thinnest, were the ones whose extra-hour voters he just had set aside. That's not a footnote. That's the whole story. So think about that for a second. The guy fighting for his runoff spot filed an emergency motion while the polls were still open to stop the extension that was giving urban voters more time to find their correct location. And the court gave it to him. You know, I'm starting to lean pretty hard toward the idea that this was less about election integrity and more about election outcomes. Here's a number that deserves its own moment. Nearly $1 million. That's what Dallas and Williamson counties spent in taxpayer money just to manage the confusion caused by the decision to end joint elections. Not to run the election, not to staff the polling places or print the ballots, specifically to do public education and logistics around the chaos that was created when the GOP chairs refused to sign the joint agreement. Kendall Scudder, chairman of the Texas Democratic Party, said it plainly at a press briefing on March 3rd. Both counties have spent $1 million trying to get the word out about this change. $1 million of taxpayer money that didn't need to be spent. Sit with that. The money didn't have to be spent. It was spent because a decision was made, a choice, not a mandate, to dismantle a system that had worked for 15 years, and the public paid for the fallout. Now put that next to the bigger number. This Texas Senate primary, the one Paxton is running in, the one where Cornyn is fighting for his political life, has already cost more than $110.5 million total, the most expensive Senate primary in American history. Cornyn's side alone has spent over $70 million. Paxton and his allies spent more than $15 million. So we have a $110.5 million election. Inside that election, a decision was made that cost taxpayers an additional $1 million just to communicate a change that didn't need to happen. And that change made the election itself harder to navigate. More locations, more confusion, more voters turned away, specifically in the urban precincts where the incumbent frontrunner was weakest. And the party that made that decision is the same party that has spent years telling Texas voters that it stands for election integrity, that it cares about making sure every legal vote is counted correctly, that its interventions in election administration are about protecting the process, not manipulating the outcome. $1 million taxpayer dollars, a crashed website, a segregation order filed by a candidate while his own name was on the ballot. And the party whose policy choices produced every one of those outcomes is still calling it integrity. That's what election integrity looks like in Texas in 2026, which is a mess, really. And look, I want to say this directly to anyone watching who's been voting in Texas for 20, 30, 40 years. They spent your money to make your vote harder to cast. Not by accident, not because of some logistical oversight. They made a deliberate choice, billed you for the consequences, and called it integrity. That's the part that should make every Texan's blood boil, regardless of party. Here's the contradiction at the center of this whole story, and it needs to land clearly. The stated justification for ending joint elections, the reason Allen West and the Dallas County GOP refused to sign the joint agreement, was election integrity. The argument is that vote anywhere centers are harder to secure, harder to audit, and create more opportunities for fraud. That a return to precinct-specific voting is more controlled, more traceable, and ultimately more trustworthy. That argument has a logic to it. It's coherent on its surface. But look at what actually happened when they implemented it. The Dallas County election website crashed on Election Day, making it impossible for voters to verify their precinct assignment in real time. That's not a more auditable system. That's a system that failed at the exact moment it was most needed. The Vote Anywhere system didn't require voters to look up a precinct online under time pressure. It just required them to find a polling place. That's a lower bar to clear, and it cleared it reliably for 15 years. The segregation of ballots cast after 7 p.m. creates a separate, legally contested pool of votes that will now require additional judicial review before they're counted, if they're counted at all. That's not a cleaner audit trail. That's a disputed category of ballots that will take weeks to resolve and may end up in litigation. The old system didn't produce segregated ballots. It produced counted ballots. And the $1 million in public education spending? That was spent trying to overcome the confusion generated by the new system. In the old system, that money didn't need to be spent because voters didn't need to be educated about a scavenger hunt they'd never had to run before. So the integrity upgrade cost more, confused more people, crashed the verification infrastructure, created a disputed pool of ballots, and resulted in an emergency stay filed by a candidate whose own race was directly impacted by the very precincts facing the most confusion. If someone designed a more secure system that was also easier to use, that's an upgrade. What happened in Dallas County yesterday was the opposite. It was a system that's harder to use and produces more legal uncertainty, not less. The only thing it did reliably was make it harder to vote in the precincts that were breaking the wrong way. That's not integrity, that's engineering, and that's worth knowing about. So here's where I land on all of this. Election integrity is supposed to mean that every legal vote gets counted. That's it. That's the whole thing. What happened in Dallas County yesterday was the opposite. A 15-year system that worked got dismantled. Voters were turned away. The website crashed. A candidate filed a motion to stop extra time while his name was on the ballot, and taxpayers got the bill. Paxton didn't just sue Dallas County, he sued his own voters. At 7:01 p.m., while fighting for his runoff spot, y'all, pay attention to who's protecting your vote and who's protecting their seat. Thanks for spending a few minutes digging into this with me. If you want more grounded, progressive commentary without the outrage bait, subscribe and stick around. Every time you watch, share, and engage, it helps build a community that believes democracy is worth understanding and defending. I'll see you in the next video.